afternoon, everyone. This is Allison from Fanshawe Pioneer Village. Today we are reading Chapter 3 of The Boy with an R in His Hand by James Reaney. This section or chapter, which is Chapter 3, is called The Girl with an R on Her Hand. Uncle John's house was of red brick and set in a large garden, which at the back became almost a small farm. There was a pigeon house, a sheep house, a poultry house, and, off to one side, a swine house or pigsty. There was also a stable for the horses that pulled Uncle John's coach. The coachman who drove these horses lived up above them. The garden was laid out in square beds, joined together with gravelled paths. Alec had never seen so many kinds of flowers and vegetables, and for the first time he saw apple and pear trees not seen in the Red River country with its colder winters. The windows of Uncle John's house were larger than any the boys had seen out west, as if they might be a sort of game. They had made up of many small square panes of glass, and Alec thought of the rain playing checkers upon them. Up over the front door was a pretty flower-like window, which Cousin Bichetta called a fanlight. Up above this, set in the gable of the house, was a small oval window, which they called a bull's-eye window. Inside Uncle John's house was just as splendid as the outside, with marble fireplaces, crystal chandeliers, and walls painted with festoons of flowers and ruined Grecian temples. Here is a picture of Uncle John's house. In one room there was a dark green carpet. This was called the drawing room, although Alec never observed anyone did any drawing there. In the room called the parlor, there was a bright red carpet on the floor. Alec felt his head swimming at all the color and sparkle. Directly underneath the parlor was the kitchen, a basement kitchen, and two maidservants carried trays of food up and down a steep, narrow pair of stone stairs. Here Alec and Cousin Alan ate their supper. Alec kept looking at the fire in the great fireplace. He thought of all the campfires he and Joel had fallen asleep by as they came down the rivers and lakes with the voyageurs. If he closed his eyes, he could still hear the singing and hear the paddles dripping in the cold, flowing water. Joel had been thought old enough to have tea with Aunt Henrietta and Uncle John upstairs. Alec was just as glad he had been kept down in the kitchen, for he was mortally afraid of breaking one of Aunt Henrietta's china cups. Down in the kitchen, they ate off of tin plates, and he was safe, or so he thought, from any further embarrassing accidents, such as he had made on his first minutes at York, so memorable and so watery. "Let's ask to go out after supper," said Cousin Alan. "Let's go and tease the bear in Gosling's yard." Alec looked at his cousin, who wasn't too much older than he was. Cousin Alan had blonde, curly hair, and a little snub nose, and a mouth that never quite closed over two large, white, upper front teeth. "How come he keeps a bear in his yard?" "He caught it when it was a cub, and he put it in a cage. He lets us tease it with sticks and stones." "Sounds cruel. I do not like it," replied Alec. "Joel and I don't believe in torturing animals. My father says that someday there must be no traps and no gallows, and babies will play with lions and lions with babies." "Ah, come off that preaching stuff. Hey, I'm going to call you Reverend. Say, a fat lot of good all that talk did your father. He got scalped by Indians, didn't he? Isn't that right, Rev?" "Father," said Alec, "except that he disappeared and the hunters came back with their story." Cousin Alan then suggested that they take their fighting rooster, Napoleon, over to Feisty Jarvis's stable and watch it fight a certain renowned black rooster that lived there. But Alec thought that this was just as cruel as the proposal to go torment a bear. "Well then, Reverend," exploded Alan, "what in blazes name do you want to do after supper?" "I'd like to explore the town." "Oh, Reverend, what a muff you are. Explore the town. Who wants to do that? Here I thought I'd have someone to play with." "So did I," said Alec, whose quick tongue was soon to get him into trouble. "You needn't give yourself airs, Reverend. You're only an orphan now, you know, and if Papa doesn't educate you, you may have to grow up to be a laborer. I'll be a gentleman when I grow up, but you'll have to work with your hands." "Who cares?" said Alex. "It's a free country. Say, Alan, what's the name of the girl over there who's slicing the bread?" "Rebecca." "What's the matter with her hand?" whispered Alec. "She's got a funny mark on the back of her hand." Cousin Alan grinned and then shouted at the servant girl to come over and show young Reverend her hand. Alec, for embarrassment, could have fallen through the floor. "See her hand?" cried Alan, grabbing it. "It's got an R branded on it. Do you know why?" Here's a picture of Rebecca with the R in her hand while she's carving some bread. "Please," said Alec, hiding his face. "Don't tell me. Please forgive me, Rebecca." "It's because she's a robber, aren't you, Rebecca? So R for robber." It came out that last year the girl had been working at Dr. Strachan's, whose great house Alec had seen as they sailed into the harbor. One day, Mistress Strachan noticed that one of her best silver spoons was missing, and Rebecca was accused of stealing it. Rebecca said that she had known the spoon to be missing for some time, but had been afraid to tell how it had disappeared because it was such a strange story. Her story was that all one morning she had noticed a crow hanging about the window, sitting on the windowsill and occasionally croaking at her. The windows were open since it was the first fine weather they had had, and Mistress Strachan had wanted the house to be aired. She directed Rebecca to clean the silver and then went off in the carriage to tea at another lady's house. The spoons were cleaned last, and they lay ready on a table. Rebecca left the table for a few minutes to answer the door. When she came back, one of the spoons was missing. "A likely story," said Alan. "But true, Master Alan," said Rebecca firmly. "Shut up. Well, Reverend, the Strachans in the court didn't believe that story, especially when a silver pin of Mrs. Strachan was also disappeared. Where'd you bury them, Rebecca? So she was convicted of stealing these things herself. Let that be a lesson to you, Reverend. We don't like robbers in York." So they took a branding iron with an R on it for robber and heated it up in the stove at the courthouse, and then took that very hand and stamped R on it forever. Here's a picture of the black bird with the spoon. "Rebecca," came Bashida's voice from the top of the stairs. "You had best bring up that tea now, and Papa wants to see you, Cousin Alec." As they climbed up the steps and proceeded to the drawing room, Alec had a chance to apologize to the girl. "It doesn't matter, Master Alec. You couldn't help it." "Rebecca, I believe you about the crow. Out on the Red River there was a raven stole a ring once from the governor's lady. She left it out on a table with the window open. Maybe I'll find that spoon and pin for you some day. They caught the raven, you know, and she got her ring back. Everyone had been saying it was the Indians." "That's very kind of you, Master Alec," whispered Rebecca as they came to the end of the passageway, and so to the door of the drawing room. Rebecca set down the McAllisters' great silver teapot, which was decorated with a large capital M and a coat of arms. Here is a picture of the tea setting. At first, when they had seen their Uncle John's face, they had thought how much he looked like Mother. He was their mother's brother, after all. But there were two heavy lines that came down from either side of his nose to the corner of his mouth. Their mother's face had been kind, but his face was growly, and his mouth was always twisting. Into a scornful smile and his mouth was always twisting into a scornful smile at those he spoke to, as if he didn't think they were his equals. "Well, boys," said Uncle John to Alec, "what did your father think I should do to help his orphans?" "I don't know," said Alec, looking at the teapot. "Send us to school, maybe?" "Call me sir, if you please." "Address your Uncle John as sir," put in Aunt Henrietta. Aunt Henrietta had very blonde, almost white blonde hair, nearly hidden by a large, beruffled and belaced white cap. The ladies who lived on the banks of the Red River had worn such caps, but never as full and as foaming with lace as Aunt Henrietta's. "Call him sir," whispered Joel. Schoolboy, went on Uncle John. Where would I get the money? Father sent money along with us. Didn't you give him the sealed letter, Joel? Oh, pardon me, Uncle John. Sir John, I mean. Not enough. Enough for a couple of years, but not for more than that. Feeding 2 growing boys is easy thing with prices the way they are in this town. Put in Aunt Henrietta with a head shake. Quiet, Etta. Quiet till I tell the cub what I could do with him and his brother here. After all, how do I know you really are my nephews? Well, who are we then? Said Alec, forgetting to say, sir, already. Where did we get the letter and the box from Father's papers in them, and Mother's things? Why, you might be 2 vagabond boys who stole these things. There was a twinkle in Uncle John's eye. It was his idea of joking with his nephews. Now, boys, I own a grist mill and a large piece of farm property up the river, and my people up there are always asking if I could send them up some young lads to help. If you don't turn out well down here, you at my office, Joel, and you at school, Alec, I'll send you up there and let the miller take care of you. How do you like the sound of that? Not much, said Alec. Both aunt and uncle haw-hawed at this. Alec could see their reflections bobbing up and down in the silver sides of the teapot as Aunt Henrietta poured out tea for everyone. Sounds too much like hard work, eh? Roared Uncle John, slapping his knee and laughing some more. By the way, he continued, suddenly changing, there's one thing. Nephews, let me remind you. You come from an outlandish part of the world where, no doubt, you had tea with Indians and ate off the same plate as buffaloes, but now you're in civilized society. So? Well? Alec, I saw you talk familiarly with the servant girl Rebecca. Never talk with servants or criminals. Give them orders, yes. Talk to them, no. Always remember that a well-bred family like the McAllisters are. Empire loyalists, a family to be proud of. Why, laughed Alec. Why, Uncle John, our fathers always told us that your father, Mother's father, was a farrier, a man who took care of horses when they're sick. A farrier in the army till our other grandfather gave him the money to start his own store here. Your maternal grandfather, roared Uncle John, was a distinguished surgeon, you young lout. I'm sure he was. He drew out Governor Simcoe's bad teeth for him, but he started out on horses. At that point, Uncle John gave Alec a series of smart cuffs and fell into a terrible fit of temper. Uncle John did not like to be reminded that his father had been a farrier. Off to your garret. Show him up, Bashida, before he's the first nephew I've ever thrashed, he said, and then when his roars had become speech again. Alec fled the room and seemed to sleep in bed when Joel came up later in the evening, but Alec said good night from under the covers. I'm not going to say good night to you, said Joel. You embarrassed me twice today, and you're such a little fool. You've got to get along with these people. We've got to. Joel got into bed, blew out the candle, and burrowed his head into the bolster. Joel was in many ways quite different from Alec. Alec thought over the differences. It had not been a pleasant evening. After recovering from Uncle John's cuffs, Alec had heard the bear growling in its cage somewhere not far off, and the shouts of the boys as they roused its fury with sticks and stones. Yes, Joel and he were different. For example, when the cannon had been fired that afternoon at the fort, Joel's heart had beat with fear, but Alec's with joys at the marvelous sound. Joel slept soundly tonight because of the first time ever they had come to North America. He was sure that Indians, wild Indians, would not attack, could not attack. But Alec almost prayed nightly that the Indians would attack and kidnap him. He was ready to admit that they might kill him, but then there were those lucky white infants who were adopted into savage tribes. He would be one of those and be happy a happy Indian for the rest of his life. For him, the trip down through the wilderness had been disappointingly peaceful. As for having to stay and live with these people, though, thought Alec, also thinking how he must get up in the early morning and do something about that bear. As for living with these people, surely that wasn't true. Surely you could always run away. Well, friends, I hope you have a lovely afternoon, and I will see you tomorrow for more stories in adventures. Have a great day.